Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the MB Om podcast. I'm super excited for today's episode. I have a really neat guest on today. Her name is Andrea Peloso, and she's a yoga teacher based out of Toronto, Canada. And I'm really fascinated with Andrea because she has such an interesting background. And just going on her website, I was so curious by everything. She teaches everything from Ashtanga to restorative to yin to spinal immersion, and just a very, very fascinating realm of practice. And so the reason that I wanted to have her on the podcast is to talk about sort of how as a yoga teacher you can specialize in a lot of different things, because we've heard from lots of different people who have kind of chosen one direction, developing teacher trainings, maybe owning a yoga studio, maybe specializing in on restorative. And something that I think is really amazing about Andrea is that she's kind of gone in all these different directions. And so I won't spoil anything that she has to say about how she kind of got in that direction. But I will say that she has lots of really interesting tips and tricks as a yoga teacher and lots of fascinating information to share. So without further ado, here's Andrea. All right. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's amazing to have you here, Andrea.
Oh, thank you.
So I was thinking that we would start with sort of your discovery of yoga and when you first got into yoga and what that journey was like.
So I grew up in a really small town in rural Ontario, and I got bored when I was 15, and I decided that I couldn't really rely on my friends anymore to always entertain me because, 15-year-olds in a small town, all they pretty much do is try and get alcohol, right? I mean, it's sort of, so I got really bored, and I decided that I would volunteer for the local women's shelter. And so I trained as a volunteer to support women getting out of abusive relationships, which was a little ridiculous because I was 15 years old. I mean, who wants a 15-year-old to be their life coach going through that, right? But
that's incredible though.
It was fun. But the woman who ran that shelter program was best friends with a woman who ran the yoga program in my town, which was a really lovely, intimate class that happened once a week. I was the only person there that wasn't in their sort of 40s and 50s because yoga wasn't really trendy when I started. Mm-hmm. And so I just had this very supportive yoga teacher who loaned me books on yoga, and I started to do yoga by myself from books every day when I didn't go to class. So yeah, that was my beginning, was just in my hometown with this interesting connection between a women's shelter that I was volunteering at and the only available yoga class and a really caring teacher.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was good.
I grew up in a small town in Alberta, so I definitely get the people.
I mean, right?
People just don't have much to do. It's like small town. I mean, the internet kind of came around when I was like early, right before my teens. So I feel like that kind of added some interesting things that we could do. But yeah, definitely drinking by the river, drinking in the middle of fields, just anywhere that you could get alcohol, you'd be drinking. So going from
pre-internet.
Yeah, definitely. So going from practicing in your small town, being one of the younger people, how did you get into really loving yoga and then moving into becoming a teacher?
Well, I continued to practice, and I had a small stint of just teaching for a friend when I was 19, 20, living in Australia. I covered some classes for my friend when he was away traveling. But then when I got to Toronto, I finished university and I needed a break. So I decided I wanted to become a philosophy professor, but I took a year off and I did a yoga teacher training at the Downward Dog. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how it all began for me in terms of formally starting to teach.
Yeah.
And I also worked as I worked as a receptionist at the yoga studio for the year prior to doing that teacher training. So I had taken a lot of classes with various teachers, and I knew a lot of teachers. And the yoga studio at the time was a really large studio in Canada with a lot of classes. And so when I was first asked to, when I graduated, I immediately was asked to teach at the yoga studio, which gave me a chance to practice teaching.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it was such a different teaching world like a few years ago than it is now.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Just everyone I've talked to, especially for this podcast, has such an interesting way of coming into it. Like so much less competitive. It seems more relaxed to get a job, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I definitely think that there was more demand for teachers in Toronto. I guess 13, 14 years ago, yoga was still a growing thing.
Yeah.
So that, of course, gave me some opportunities right off the bat to start teaching. I still, worked other jobs, and I feel like it's still, even back then, I feel like still there was a lot of competition and stress. There could be, but there was also maybe more opportunities to avoid that and find safe havens to learn as a teacher.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so did you sort of like give up on this dream to become a philosophy professor, or what kind of happened?
It's funny. I never really gave up on it. I still love philosophy, and I still study philosophy, but I just became really fascinated with the process of teaching. I loved teaching. I loved passing on what I was learning. I loved teaching in a setting where people, voluntarily showed up to come. And I felt in a way that some of the yoga philosophy was a chance for me to teach applied philosophy, ahimsa, nonviolence, non-competition, satya, truthfulness. There's actually a lot of opportunities to teach at least a little bit of yoga philosophy in teaching a drop-in class.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I never really thought about, because there is so much philosophy in yoga. I mean, there's endless things that you can read on yoga philosophy, and there's so many different opinions and viewpoints and stories and theories and that sort of thing. That's pretty cool. I hadn't really thought about, like, obviously I learned yoga philosophy in my training and try to incorporate a little bit in all my classes, but I just hadn't put that two and two together, that's sort of, philosophy.
Yeah, it felt like there was at least a connection there, but I still love philosophy just as much. But yeah, it was just one of those things where something that I loved, which was getting to practice and teach yoga, just started to happen for me. And I enjoyed the journey. I didn't really want to break the flow, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's totally fair. And so something that I thought was really interesting when I was looking on your website was that it seems like you teach such a variety of different things. And a lot of times, I mean, there's lots of teachers who teach a variety of classes, but looking at your website, I was struck by restorative teacher trainings and yin and, all this body movement stuff. And so I'm really curious how you got into all this different stuff.
Well, I think really slowly over a long period of time. So, as a teenager, I practiced hatha yoga, and then Downward Dog was teaching Ashtanga, and I was really passionate about, learning the primary series and getting into the second series. And I was able to study with a lot of Ashtanga teachers through the Downward Dog at that time. And then from that, I burnt out a little bit and I hurt my back, which then got me very interested in anatomy. And then I met Judith and I learned a lot about applied anatomy and restorative yoga through her. And so that became a whole new journey of studying with her and assisting with her. Judith Lassiter is one of my teachers. Mm-hmm. And so it just was kind of one of these things of, there's so many helpful aspects to yoga that applied to me at different periods of time in my life. And I still love them all. So I feel like what I learned later still informs the Ashtanga practice that I still have. I mean, I obviously don't only practice Ashtanga, but it's, so I'm not a traditional Ashtanga practitioner anymore, but it still informs, what I do and how I practice. So I just think over the years, I guess it's been a really long time, I slowly had the chance to study deeply in different things. And then yin is the most recent addition, but I had studied a lot of traditional Chinese medicine just out of self-interest for years prior. And so then getting into yin just felt like, oh, this is really fascinating that these sequences apply to these organ systems that I've read about. And I wouldn't say that everything I do with an equal depth. I mean, yin is something that I'm learning right now. I would never offer a teacher training in yin, so to speak. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I just think it was so cool. Like, I went on your website and I was like, I knew that you offered this restorative teacher training because I'd seen it at the yoga lounge when you offered it last year, and then coming up again this year, I guess in like a month pretty much. And
Yay.
I kind of had it in my head. I'm like, okay, she's like a restorative yoga teacher, which I think is really amazing. And, you know, you've developed this teacher training. And then I went on your website and I'm like, wow, she teaches Ashtanga and she teaches, you know, all these other things. And I'm somebody who gets like, I get kind of bored of things easily. Like I'm turning 27 in the next couple weeks and I've already changed my career like 3 times. And I'm like, oh man, how am I going to stick to one thing for like an extended period of time? So I was really fascinated by that because a lot of times I feel like it's not that you're taught that you can only do one thing, but it's like learn something, learn it well, get really good at it, and then keep doing it type thing.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting thing because, I mean, I think it's almost like finding a balance, right? Because we all have a natural curiosity where we want to, kind of go further afield and study more things. And then on the other hand, yoga doesn't really work. Like all of these various yoga practices don't really work unless we deepen into them, you know, and we need to also deepen into them gently, right? We can't force ourselves. So I think even the process of learning how to have a regular practice can be challenging. It was challenging for me to conceive of having a regular practice. And I tried the method of forcing myself, which of course led to, like what you'd say in yoga would be samsaras. Like it led to some negative experiences that I gave myself. And then I realized, wait, you know, I really can't do it this way. I have to find a way to gently have a regular practice. And so, most of what I teach reflects a period of time. Like I have a very solid restorative practice. I have a back injury, which means that the Ashtanga that I practice now it's not a serious back injury anymore, but it's just something that I have to watch. So the Ashtanga that I practice now is informed by Iyengar yoga and biomechanics. But, you know, I think it was just slowly over a number of years trying to stay connected to things I'd already learned while also allowing myself to branch out and just kind of trying to nurture both of those things as much as possible that allowed me to do many different things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit on something really important too, is the practice aspect of teaching yoga. And I think it's something that, like, I think it's really, really important to be practicing when you're a teacher, because that time you're teaching is not your practice, that's your student's practice. And it's something that, as somebody who's come out of teacher training in the last year, has been something that I struggle with. It's like weeks where I teach a bunch of classes, I just don't want to go to a studio anymore. And I'm so like over yoga. Like I see my mat and I'm like, oh, I need to practice, but I just don't want to get on you right now. I just don't want to do it. And I think that it is something that you do have to find that balance, because forcing yourself for a lot of people, like obviously you, myself included, just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think, that is a good point. And so many teachers have said really lovely things about that. You know, Judith Lassiter, has said a lot of things about self-practice. And one of the things that she said was, I just go to my mat, but I don't necessarily tell myself what I'm going to practice, or, and then people like Matthew Sweeney in the Ashtanga tradition will say, well, don't avoid poses you don't like, but also don't not do poses that you do like, find a balance there. And Ramanand Patel will say, like, learn to love the practice. Don't force yourself to do something that you don't enjoy doing. So Joni Mitchell, when she was recording her second album, and I'm going to butcher this story, but to me, it taught me a lot about practice myself. Mm-hmm. She was working with someone who was really pushing her to sing a lot, and she found that it was actually making her hate singing. Believe it or not, this happens in all kinds of things that we do. We can actually start to not enjoy them.
Yeah.
So what she did is she actually recorded her album when her producer was away with the sound engineer. She convinced the sound engineer to produce the album with her without the producer there. And she said she felt that she was protecting her love of music. And so I think that's a really important factor for yoga teachers to take in. I mean, a few things that I've done is I don't really demonstrate very much when I teach anymore. That allows me to... I've learned how to talk in such a way where students are mostly able to go not by demonstration. And so that allows me to avoid injury because I'm not really practicing for myself at that time. And then the other thing that I've done is to cultivate a home practice. So I love going to studios, and I like calling friends up and, even going to the classes that they want to go to. Or there have also been times when I've had a really dedicated practice at a studio. And then I have teachers that I study with, some of whom are in town and some of who are far away. But I also have a home practice, and a part of that question is just finding that balance between having a dedicated practice, but not doing it with force. And then this is again quoting Judith, who says, we don't really think about brushing our teeth; we just brush our teeth. It's just something that we do every day. And so how can I find a way to do a practice that is harmonious with my life, not overdoing it, not underdoing it, and inspires me creatively, but is also something I'm able to do with regularity. And I think that's a journey of self-exploration as well, is figuring all of that out.
Yeah, definitely. I love the analogy of like brushing your teeth. I was one of those like kids who just didn't want to brush my teeth ever. And my parents always forced me to. I think it was this idea of like, you have to brush your teeth. And then as I kind of like ventured into my teenage adult years and I wasn't being supervised to brush my teeth, I'd kind of be rebellious and be like, I'm not going to brush my teeth tonight. Like, I don't want to. And you wake up just feeling so gross. Like your teeth actually feel so gross when you don't brush them. And now, like, I really like brushing my teeth. I think it feels amazing. But it's almost like I had to learn on my own to enjoy brushing my teeth. And I feel like that's a good way to think about, like, a home yoga practice for sure. Is, like, kind of just allowing it to come in a more natural way and not forcing it on yourself. Like, doing it when it feels right, doing what you want to do on your mat. And then it just becomes this habit that you miss a day and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to do it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I practice every day, but I'm not strict with myself about how that is going to be. And I find that has made a really big difference. Sometimes it doesn't happen till the end of the day. I think it's best if you can pick a regular time. But if you can't pick a regular time, I just make sure that I've tried something by the end of the day. And then, of course, going to class is also, important. But I think, again, having that relationship with ourselves with yoga will also really empower us with as teachers over the years. And of course, we can also relate to our students who struggle with practicing as well sometimes. So,
yeah, definitely. I think that's very, very true point. And so going into, if there's people out there who are really interested in all aspects of yoga, sort of, I guess, the way that you have been, do you have any recommendations for them in terms of finding many different specialties and kind of building on your knowledge as a teacher?
Yeah, I do. I think I would just don't fast track anything. I mean, it's always good to get a prenatal training, I think, for men and women. Mostly women get it because you're always going to have a pregnant student who comes to your class. So that's a nice thing to do, to add on to your initial teacher training. Mm-hmm. But I would just recommend that in a way, I never really thought of yoga as a career in a way. I always thought it was kind of wild and quirky that I had somehow started to teach yoga. And I think that really allowed me to kind of follow, like yoga. When I started teaching yoga, I was 23. It was kind of like a unicorn, you know, it was like, wow, this is cool. I never thought this would happen.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It kind of just allowed me to follow my nose, but also, none of this has been a rush. It's all been something that slowly came over years. And I think, that's kind of disappointing in a way because, if you're passionate about teaching yoga, you kind of want to get started right now. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying to take away that excitement and that enthusiasm. But I think make sure not to learn so much at one period of time that you can't digest it, in your own practice, because in the end, what you wind up teaching people, or at least what I find is that what works best for me and what feels the best is I really only teach things that I and myself have experienced in my practice to work. And so even out of all of the many things that I've learned, I teach maybe a small handful of those things until I've fully digested the other things in a way where I feel like, okay, I know this works. This feels great to do it. And I think my students are really going to benefit from this. Mm-hmm. So in a way, make sure that you fully have digested the first thing that you've done and then wait for your natural excitement and enthusiasm to pick up before you do the next thing. Because I think for most people, they experience a little bit of a teacher training hangover when they're done their 200 hour or 500 hour. It's like, oh my gosh, that was so much, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's getting back to that whole thing of force. You know, I wouldn't force the next training after that. I would wait for your natural curiosity and enthusiasm to carry you and wait for that chance to digest everything that you've just taken in.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice.
And the other thing I would say is just think critically, like what's working for you, what isn't working for you. If something isn't working for you, is there something else you could learn that would be a solution? And then it'll really also feel like sort of a fun mystery that you're solving that's very personal as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's really good advice. I feel like sometimes there is this, I don't know, like sort of societal pressure, expectation as to things that we're supposed to do in life. And I feel like being a yoga teacher is sort of different, but there's also this like other umbrella of things that are sort of expected. And sometimes it's hard to know, like, okay, like I've got 200 hour, but I need to know more. Should I just go do a 300 hour right away? Or, you know, and I think that that's really good advice to kind of just like digest everything because there is a lot of information in a teacher training. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, I would just follow your own levels of enthusiasm. I mean, if you're exhausted and burnt out, take some time to assimilate what you've learned. I think sometimes like nowadays, it's almost like people don't have that chance to sort of quietly go into their own practice and yeah, just digest what they've learned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because I actually did a podcast episode with one of the friends that I made at my teacher training, and we talked about how I got back from my teacher training and I taught like a week after getting back. And I was working the day after I got back from my trip, and I was over in Bali. So I'm completely jet lagged. I'm back like working right away, teaching like a week later. And it was just like my head was still spinning and I had no time to sit down and really take out everything that I learned. And her big thing was like, take time for yourself, like read back through your notes because there's all this stuff that you forget that somebody told you because you took in so much information.
I think if you were feeling really excited and enthusiastic to teach, that's great. I think it would be if you felt kind of overwhelmed, to honor that, just to honor where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really good advice. And so at what point did you go from being a yoga teacher to developing your own teacher trainings?
I was thinking back about that, it was kind of an organic process. I'm really grateful that Diane Bruni and Ron Reed, who own the Downward Dog, supported me in teaching a restorative class at their studio. And in that period of time, I was studying a lot with Judith and assisting a lot, and a number of years passed. And then I think the first teacher training stuff that I did was through the Downward Dog. There were a couple of just 1 hour sessions, 4 hour sessions where I would weigh in and give a little intro to restorative yoga in their existing teacher training. And it was from that experience where I started to look around the city at the trainings that were being offered. And I thought, you know what, I have a lot of expertise in this now. And I think what I have to offer would bring something to the city. And then I also ran it by my teacher and said, what do you think if I did this? And she said she thought it would be fine and I'd probably do a great job. And so it was around then that I started to really develop a training and think about what I would want that to look like. Probably took maybe a couple of years. It was sort of an organic process.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And then what was the actual process of developing a teacher training like? Because it seems like there's a lot that needs to go in to create a good teacher training.
Yeah, I mean, that's another awesome question. So with the restorative training, I wanted to give people a training where they would have a rich experience in terms of their personal practice. And I wanted them to have a good theoretical background as to why restorative yoga is important. So I kind of knew that going in, that I wanted there to be a lot of chances for people to experience the postures. I wanted to go over a lot of the important details because restorative yoga is full of a lot of details. There's this, they say God is in the detail. And I wanted people to understand why those things were meaningful. So I think I just sort of knew. And the other thing I really asked myself was, because it's particularly with restorative yoga, I studied so much with Judith Hanson Lassiter. Would she be proud of this training? What would she think? Then the other thing that I sort of did was I really knew that I wanted the science of restorative yoga to be important. And so, yeah, I think partly because I had assisted so much. I mean, I think by the time I actually taught a restorative training, I had hundreds of hours of study and assisting Judith.
Yeah.
So some of it was almost like in my memory. It was almost in my body, so to speak. And then I kind of divided it up into Eastern philosophy and Western science. And so I knew that I wanted students to have not just a theoretical experience of both, but a deep experience on both levels. And so when I knew that those things were important, it allowed me to construct a training where I thought that people would know in their bodies and experience in their bodies why restorative yoga is important. Did that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And then, so going through this process of developing this training, like what sort of things did you learn? Like, I guess, like sort of business lesson type things did you learn along the way?
I mean, I think again, much like the idea of when I first started teaching yoga, thinking, wow, isn't this cool? I didn't really, I've never really thought of yoga as sort of a career. And then I think really for me, what was important was finding places to host my training where there was a real respect between myself and the studio owners. Or if I felt sometimes that I couldn't find that, I would just host the training myself. I would, rent a nice space out and host it. So I think that was really important to me. It was important to me to feel like I was in a place that was treating me fairly, and also a place that would be a great, safe, inclusive, and accepting space for the students to go to. So I think in a way, those were sort of some early business lessons where I don't really think in terms of, I didn't think in terms of business, but in the end it was, where am I going to be treated fairly and respected? And where are my students going to feel that no matter who they are, they're welcome? And I think in the end, those two things, while they're really important just for me as a human being and for them as human beings, also being uncompromising in that, being uncompromising and finding spaces where those two principles were honored, gave me a really good start. It gave me a really good start where I could be true to myself and my students could feel welcome, and which then meant that people continued to want to take those trainings.
Yeah, that's awesome. And thinking about, like, is it important for you when you host a training at a studio that like studio owner or that studio like offers restorative classes and is kind of behind like restorative as a yoga practice?
You know, that's a really fun, I get asked by all kinds of different people to offer trainings. And so sometimes studio owners may have health issues and they think, wow, you know, I've never even been interested in restorative yoga before and it's never been at my studio, but now I think I need it. And so it's a chance for them to experience it themselves, but then possibly also start to offer it at their studio. So no, I feel like anyone who is a good and honest person who reaches out to me, where there's a genuine interest in experiencing the restorative yoga practice, I will probably teach there. Now, there are studios that I avoid teaching at, and that's usually if there's some kind of politics. I once was invited to a community where I heard from other teachers of that community that the place that I was invited to teach at would really only make the training open to their teachers, and that there was kind of a battle going on in the city between different yoga studios, and that it was really hard for the teachers in that city.
Oh, wow.
So I declined that offer. I know. I declined that offer and I waited until I found a person who was like a good person and a neutral space where everyone would feel welcome.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't think necessarily existing experience in restorative is necessary because restorative is really still so new. And I think it's good for everyone and it's healing for everyone. So I'm just excited to share it with anyone who's interested.
Yeah, restorative's pretty incredible. I didn't really know anything about restorative yoga till I moved to Canmore, so summer of 2014, and I was like, what is this thing where we lie on bolsters and open our hips for like 5 minutes? I was like, I've never experienced this form of yoga.
Yeah, that even sounds like a restorative yin crossover as well. That slowness combined with the stretch. That's sort of yin, and you probably did some restorative in that class too. That's very cool.
Yeah. What actually is the difference between yin and restorative?
Actually, quite a lot. And it's interesting because I think most people don't know. So yin is long, slow, patient stretching that is passive stretching, where you're getting into stretching connective tissue and fascia. Restorative yoga, I don't even really think of as stretching. Restorative yoga is all about support. It's all about being in a supported enough position that your body can have a profoundly deep relaxation response. So I don't know if you've ever taken a nap in the afternoon, maybe on a Sunday, and you can still hear people like cooking
Thursday.
You still people like cooking downstairs. You can still hear your partner moving around the space. You can still hear your dog scratching its ear. But other than that, you are you may as well be asleep. Like your body doesn't want to move. You don't want to hear anything. that's the direction that we're going in, and that's where we want to bring people in a restorative practice. And obviously you couldn't have that experience in a yin practice, right?
Yeah.
Because you're even if you're holding a stretch for 5 minutes, it's still a stretch, and you're there for too short of a time, and you're still stretching. So they're both very slow and gentle practices, but actually the effect they have on the body is radically different.
Interesting.
And there is a tiny bit of stretching in restorative yoga, but really there's not a lot of pressure. It's mostly opening, mostly support. The organs are free to move. The diaphragm is free to expand.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know, because I've been to yin and restorative classes, and each time the experience is very different. And I mean, it's always different depending on teachers, but yeah, my boyfriend and I were talking about, he's like, do you actually know the difference between yin and restorative? And I was like, I don't. And I'm curious to get into that as a teacher. So it's good to start with a differentiation between them, I think, for sure.
I think that's a really common confusion, and I think it's because often some restorative and some yin are taught in the same classes, and sometimes I think even teachers who are teaching these things, they may never have had a chance to take a training, and so they're kind of going out of a book or from their own practice, and so it's a little confusing still. But they're both very cool practices, but both very different.
Yeah. As somebody who is obviously quite passionate about restorative, and then also as a teacher of restorative to teachers, do you feel like it's really important to get training in that before you're teaching it?
Well, first of all, I just want to offer empathy for people who are teaching restorative yoga who don't have training, because these folks may never have had a chance to take a training, and they're still offering a space for people to experience peace and rest, right? Mm-hmm. But that said, I mean, yeah, there is so much to learn about restorative yoga. It's a truly fascinating art that requires study. It requires study like anything else. And I often, get teachers in my classes who have been teaching restorative yoga for years, and maybe they didn't have a training, and then they're so excited to learn the new information, and they feel like they can immediately apply it in their classes. So, I mean, let's put it this way. I offer 20-hour trainings and 40-hour trainings, and it never feels like there's enough time, unless it's a very small group. It always feels like there's more questions, and there's so many fascinating details. And, really restorative yoga is this wonderful, kind way to allow students to experience deep rest, which has got to be one of the most important things for our health. It's up there with getting enough exercise and drinking water. And everyone is different. People have injuries, people have different emotional sort of tendencies. So yeah, I really encourage people to study, but I also just send my heart out to anyone who's teaching restorative yoga and getting people to slow down.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think that any yoga teacher is coming from a place of like, I'm just going to go teach this and, I don't know anything, but it'll be fine. I feel like it's more of like, okay, like the owner of the studio wants to incorporate yin or restorative, and I don't know where to get a training. And so I'll just like do some research and do it. And I feel like it always comes from a place of like genuine care for students, but it seems like there is so much to know that it is important to see if you can get trained in it and learn a little bit more.
Oh yeah, I would really encourage anyone who's teaching it to come and get a training, and also nourish themselves, because they'll have a chance to go deeper in their own practice. And then that will pass on to your students as well. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that it takes yoga sort of back to like a different place. Like yoga has changed so much over the years, but it seems like for a lot of people it is this form of exercise, and they want to come and they want to get their workout in. And sometimes that can be hard as a teacher when you're really encouraging to come back to the breath and to give their body rest. And we live in this like overstimulated, overcaffeinated world, and restorative really gives people the time to like slow down and chill out, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's I mean, I love all of the like wonderful, more vigorous, challenging practices, but, certainly everything in life is about balance, right? So, I think restorative is, just everyone needs relaxation every day, and restorative yoga is a great way to get it. And it's profoundly good for people's health. And, I mean, one of the things that restorative yoga does from a scientific perspective is it, strengthens your connection to your parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system sort of has all of it's good at doing to our body all of the things that make life worth living. Good sleep, good immunity, good digestion, strong fertility, emotional healing and balance. That world we can't get to by active practice. Now, active practice is great for all kinds of other reasons. We need muscular strength. We need, building heat. It can be great for some people. And cardio, I love cardio. I still make sure I get cardio. That's not even yoga. It's just getting my heart rate up faster than I can even in my Ashtanga practice.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is deep relaxation. It gets at something that no other practice does. And so I think it's just a really awesome way to improve your health.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's also connected to meditation and compassion and letting go. So there's also a mind-body aspect that's really amazing too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible when you take like some time for yourself and you just like lie quietly down, how like settling it is for your mind.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. When people are like, I can't meditate, I'm like, you can meditate. Just start by like lying down and just like letting your brain fly, and then it'll happen.
I mean, restorative yoga is, I was listening to Jack Kornfield a while ago, and he was instructing people on doing a meditation, and he said, make sure you don't lie down and meditate, because then you should probably be doing something else, which is sleeping, because people get so sleepy when they're meditating sometimes. What in restorative yoga, people are allowed to drift off, and it's really more of a kind of healing practice. But the aspects in meditation that involve giving ourselves compassion and empathy and letting go, those are a strong part of restorative. And I found that it's also helped me prepare myself for meditation practice.
Oh, that's amazing.
But yeah, doesn't it feel good? It's just awesome. It's awesome how easy it is to calm our mind and body when we can be still for a little while, still and supported.
Yeah, definitely. Have you found that there's like a pretty large demand for restorative teacher trainings? Because I know it seems to me like, I mean, obviously outside of, you coming to Calgary, but even being down in Atlanta, sort of like traveling around the South, it seems like there's not a lot of restorative teacher trainings.
I think in general, people are starting to realize that restorative yoga is really good for them and starting to be more interested in it and want to do it more. So in the last few years, I've had quite a lot of requests to come and offer trainings, and it's always quite exciting because often when I come, it may be the first training that's happened in that community, and then those teachers go out and share it with that community. So it feels really exciting that more of this information is getting out to more people because the potential for healing is very great. Yeah.
Has it been like slow kind of uptake? Like were your first few trainings not filling? Is it growing more, or what has that process been like?
I've never thought about it that way. Some of my trainings have been smaller, and some of them have had more people in them. And I do think that I'm teaching something where people are just starting to figure out what this is. So often if I wind up teaching a training where there's less students, that may be the very first time that community has kind of thought about restorative yoga. So I'm just trying to think if I've noticed a trend either way. A little bit. I mean, I feel like there's more of a trend to people being more interested and wanting to do it more. but I tend to, let's see. Yeah, that's what I have to say. I think, yeah, it is slow. I think people are rapidly becoming interested in it. And in the last few years, I've seen a bit of a change in that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you don't really look at it like that. Like, it's like, the people who show up are here to be here, and like, that's what counts. I think that that's really awesome.
Well, I think, yeah, it's just really about sharing knowledge that's important, and it's just about sharing the practice. So sometimes smaller trainings, you just think, wow, like, this is so exciting, because these people are still, anywhere I go, people are going to wind up sharing that information with their community, right? So
yeah,
I find the potential of that like really exciting, and yeah, it's just always great to go and bring a training somewhere where there's interest.
Yeah. Do you do much of like reaching out to people to do trainings in their community, or do you sort of find that it's usually people reaching out to you to come do trainings?
Lately, it's more been people reaching out to me, but sometimes I also reach out to communities too. Yeah. For example, I really wanted to teach in St. John's, Newfoundland, because I love it out there. And also because I had a student who came to study with me in Regina who said, you should come to St. John's. And so with that, I found a cool studio out there and I contacted them. But often it goes the other way where people contact me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's sort of like this balance between having people reach out to you and you discovering maybe this new community that you hadn't considered, and then really getting into communities that were already on your mind.
Yeah. And I also, I guess I enjoy traveling. So, that's fun too.
Yeah, definitely. What's the coolest place you've traveled to for teaching?
Well, I'm excited to be going to Yellowknife, soon. I've never been there. That's exciting. I think, St. John's was really fun. I also offered a training in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which was pretty amazing. But in a way, I kind of feel like everywhere is amazing. Especially what's interesting across Canada is that every place I go has a slightly different, people are just a little bit different. Everywhere across the country is unique. So I've never really not wanted to go anywhere. It's always been kind of wonderful to go to a new place and discover it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that it attracts a lot of people into the career as a yoga teacher, because there is this potential to really, you can teach yoga anywhere in the world if you want to make it happen. There's the potential to really teach anywhere. You're not limited, because your teacher training, if you're Yoga Alliance, allows you to teach anywhere in the world, which is pretty sweet.
I've never even thought about it that way, but yeah.
It's pretty cool though, but yeah, I'm a huge fan of travel. I love discovering anywhere new. So I'm kind of the same as you. It doesn't have to be somewhere big and fancy. Sometimes you can just find these cool little backyard communities, different places in Canada or the United States, which is amazing. And so you also are into spine immersion, which is another cool thing in your background. How did you get into that?
I'm so glad you asked about this, because this was a really long process. So just to give you a little history, in the context of my Ashtanga Vinyasa practice and probably a combination of me not really knowing what it felt to be injured because I was young and getting a pretty bad adjustment, I wound up having a pelvic rotation and sacral problems.
Oh, wow.
So that left me really interested in how was I doing yoga asana that hurt my back, mm-hmm. and how can I do yoga asana that helps my back? And so I kind of went on, in the various studies that I've done with Judith Lassiter and Ramanand Patel, among a lot of other really great teachers, I felt like I was secretly on this little mystery quest to find things that made my back feel better and would heal people's backs. And so, again, I love when you actually do a yoga pose, and right when you're done the yoga pose, you instantly feel a positive residue in that part of your body. And I think in the end, that's what a nonviolent yoga practice really is. So, so it's developed slowly over years, and it's based on my studies with Judith in the spine, and biomechanics, and then in asana that honors, the biomechanics of our bodies, as well as some really cool stuff with Raman and Patel around. I don't know if I'm putting this in the right words, but asana that really makes our joints feel great. Asana that makes the joints feel great. Asana that tractions the body, elongates places that need to be elongated. So I got into it from that sort of misfortune at the beginning, but then over the years, it gave me a chance to really experiment with things that made the spine feel great. And I just think it's so fun and so interesting to apply our knowledge of what our spines really are to our yoga practice.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of like the foundation of your body, really. Like you're supported by your legs, but it's kind of our spine that really like keeps our body up, amongst other things, obviously. So spine immersion is something that you learned, and then do you incorporate that into all of your teachings? Definitely,
yeah. I mean, I still, in everything that I teach, whether it's a more fast vinyasa Ashtanga class or whether it's restorative yoga, because you can even, I mean, you could in theory hurt your back even doing restorative yoga, right? If you place things in the wrong area. I'm looking at people's spines. I'm looking at the curvature of their spines and making sure that what they're doing will leave them feeling better when they leave the class than when they came in. I mean, really, because I think so often there's actually a gray area where people are confused. They think, oh, well, this is supposed to be good for me, and some of this feels good, but some of this I actually don't know how I'm supposed to feel, and I don't necessarily feel better. And so for me, it's really important to provide people with a sense of clarity around that, and a clarity as to, yes, I successfully made myself feel better. My back feels awesome, and now I'm going home and I'm going off to do something else.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like, so many people turn to yoga as a way to heal themselves, and a lot of times that doesn't happen. And I feel like there's a bunch of different reasons why it could or could not happen. And, even sometimes people who practice for a while come away with injuries. And I feel like there's a disconnect for a lot of people between, okay, the teacher's telling me to move in this way, and this is what the shape is supposed to look like with my body. But it's like, we're all different. Like, not every pose works for every body, which is kind of the interesting and challenging thing as a yoga teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly that is true. And then also there are certain truths about the human spine. And of course there's the male spine, female spine, and probably more than that. There's probably variations between male and female, where there's actually, there are differences. And so sometimes we're actually getting instructions in a yoga practice that are not so great for the spine. And we don't know, and the teacher doesn't know, and if that's what their teacher told them. And so, both from understanding our own spines, our own practices and bodies, as well as from, understanding a little bit more about anatomy and the experience that we can have in a pose when we actually make ourselves feel better. Yeah, all of those things go into, I think, getting more clarity to people, making it really a learning experience where they go away with long-term knowledge of how to continue to work with and heal a particular part of their back or a particular part of their spine.
Yeah. And so where can people find spine immersion trainings or workshops?
I need to offer more of them. I'm offering one in St. John's, Newfoundland, this summer. And then I think I'm going to also offer more in 2017. So who knows, maybe one in Canmore. I often do offer them. Currently, I just had so many requests for restorative yoga that 2016, that's what most of my trainings are. But I'm going to offer one very soon at the beginning of 2017.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like, as somebody who is a yoga teacher, like I never want to hurt somebody in my class. Like, never. Like, that's probably one of my worst teaching nightmares. And to have a better understanding of the spine just sounds like, wow, that could really be this amazing thing to know about as a teacher.
Well, you'll get to a place of confidence where you see, if somebody comes in and they have a neck issue, you're able to say, well, that's actually probably your thoracic spine, which is below the neck. And then you know what poses to do, and they may even feel some relief right away. I find it's really exciting that way. And yeah, I mean, yoga really does work. It really does. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there's areas where people are confused, and that's usually just where there's lack of information or misinformation. So it'll allow you to teach with a lot of confidence and happiness as well, because you just kind of know they're leaving feeling definitely better than when they came in. And also, most importantly for your own spine, how can you have amazing posture when you're 90 and inspire your grandchildren and have organs that can move and breathe because you have a nice tall spine? And so. Yeah,
it's really interesting when you see like an older person. Like, I mean, for example, I'm experiencing it with my grandma right now. Like, I think she's actually shrinking, and she's into her 80s now. But it's this sort of thing that we just accept, that we get older and we're going to, get smaller. And obviously we do age, but I feel like there's lots of ways that we can kind of, I guess, elongate our lives or be healthier as we're older.
Have less pain and suffering.
Yeah, definitely.
Now and in future.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear my parents say things like, just wait till you're our age and the way that you feel. And I'm like, I am not going to feel that way when I'm your age. I'm determined.
I think there's certainly no way to avoid the aging process and slowing down a little bit. But, and there's it's important not to make promises and claims. Like, it's just coming and experiencing what a pose does in your body. Do you feel better? And having an insight around that in and of itself, I think, is so valuable. And if you can reduce pain in your life now, if you can make your back feel fantastic, if you can protect your lower back in upward dog, then that's all the better for protecting yourself in the future, and also not creating injuries, right? Not creating injuries that you then get harder to deal with as you get older. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
So just a couple more questions for you. What would you recommend for new yoga teachers to do to kickstart their careers? Do you have any advice or business tips from what you've learned? I
have so much advice. So, and I have also like a little disclaimer. So the whole concept of yoga being a career is a bit of a loaded question for me, because, when I started, it was a combination of, I think, good timing, a lot of hard work, and a good background in yoga. But what I see now in some of my students is people will see a teacher who's teaching full time and they think, okay, I want to do that and I want to make it my plan to do that. And, I think very much like acting and music, and other sort of artistic professions, there is a certain amount of timing and good luck as well as hard work that goes into these things. And sometimes I think if people don't know that, they can get taken advantage of. So I've met young teachers who are working for free at places, who have been convinced to do a lot of odd jobs. And yes, sometimes it feels like a fair exchange but sometimes it's really crossing a line into being an injustice, like teaching for free. No, I mean, or I meet people who really want to get a class at a particular yoga studio, and as a result just endlessly keep taking trainings which may or may not be good, in the hopes that they'll get a class. And you just think, wow, like in a way I feel like people are getting taken advantage of. So I just want to say that first. Don't let yourself get taken advantage of. Think critically. I think the biggest career advice I can give any yoga teacher is trust yourself and think critically. And and change course if you need to. If you don't feel comfortable with something, find another option. And then I think there's not really a fast approach to becoming a good yoga teacher or a successful one, because you are giving people an experience that they will remember over time. So that will take time. But I think what you can do is you can give yourself a really good foundation. So I have a few practical tips. One is, I don't recommend teaching at a studio that doesn't put your name on the website. Like, there's some studios that they just say the name, and there's no chance for people to find out who's teaching the class. I mean, that's no good, because you want people to actually know who you are. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that I would say, for sure, is try to teach at many studios in your city. There may be an upscale studio you can teach at. There may be, a school for teenagers you can teach at. There may be a studio where older people come. There may be a studio where younger people come. That really served me well, because what it did is it allowed me to work with a lot of different people in different environments and get a sense of what do people need. Like, what is it that I want to teach, but what is it that my student actually needs, and you kind of have to find that balance. Mm-hmm. So those two practical things, like making sure that your name is on any website and then trying to teach to a wide variety of different people, that will really help you in the beginning. And it will help you creatively come up with ideas for what you want to offer to students that could be different. The other thing I would say at the beginning is, if possible, and I know this is a lot harder for new teachers starting out, if possible, at the beginning, try to have opportunities to assist good classes that you like, and have opportunities to teach a lot of classes, because you'll gain your confidence from teaching a lot. So at the beginning, it's good to teach a lot. That said, if you can't do that, find a really wonderful space and slowly start to build it. So, find a church space that people love coming to, and, get your name out that way. Somewhere that's loving and caring and solid. Create kind of a community for people. So all of those things are good. And then the other thing is, I would say, be patient with yourself. Let the information slowly percolate. If you need to supplement it with another job, it's better to do that than to do something that you're not comfortable with, to feel that you're trapped in an arrangement that doesn't make sense for you. One thing that I just always tried to do was to think critically, and if it didn't feel like something was working for me, I tried to slowly move on to find something that would be better. So yeah, I would say slow down rather than speed up, and nourish your own practice, but also find lots of chances to be in front of people, teaching or talking, sharing yoga. It'll give you a lot of confidence. And then also learn about people who are different from you, that may have barriers that are different from yours, economic barriers, sexuality, race, class. Learn a little bit about, things like white privilege and heterosexual privilege, things that we sometimes, if you know about those things, learn about something else, learn about class injustice, learn about barriers that keep people from coming to practice. Because there are actually right now so many people who don't necessarily feel welcome in a lot of yoga studios to come and practice. And I think part of sharing yoga is going to be about making sure that everyone who wants to come can feel welcome to come, if that makes sense. So, and that's just part of striving to be a more inclusive and caring teacher, and learning about yourself and learning about others as you go along.
Yeah, that's an incredible list. Thank you so much for putting that together.
And most importantly, be good to yourself. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's always an important one. I think self-love in general is something that the world needs more of.
Definitely.
Amazing. So last question for you, and something that everyone on the podcast is getting asked, is if you could go back in time to when you first started teaching, is there any advice that you would give yourself? So Andrea, now everything that you know, what advice would you give Andrea first teaching?
I think I would say to little Andrea, I love you. Be patient. don't always be more flexible. Set boundaries in your physical practice and in your life, in your relationships. And I really love this quote by Julia Cameron. She wrote The Artist's Way. Treating yourself like a precious object will make you strong.
I love that. That's beautiful. Amazing. Well, do you have any other advice or last thoughts that you want to share with listeners?
No, I just really wish everyone all the best in their yoga journey, and invite you to gently find a home practice.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It's been amazing talking to you.
Awesome to talk to you too, and all the best.
Thank you. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that interview with Andrea Peloso as much as I did. If you want to connect with Andrea, it's andreapeloso.com. So AndreaPeloso.com. And I'll have that on the show notes at www.mbomyoga.com. If you want to join the community on Facebook, it's MBOM Yoga, and sign up for the newsletter, and I'll send you all the episodes as soon as they're out. You'll be the first to know about them, and any new announcements, books, fun yoga tips and tricks, anything you can imagine. And that's www.mbomyoga.com/newsletter. There's a tab there that you can just select. As always, thanks so much for listening.